Hello and welcome to the 100th episode of the War Report. We've got a lot going on, and I'll give you just a briefing of the subject. So we're going to be talking about Syria, Iraq, the stock market, the economy, and also how that might be related to re-election as well. And the different responses to the coronavirus that are taking place right now globally, especially with travel restrictions. And we're going to be looking at how the EU is responding, particularly how France is responding, and the US, but also as well as Russia. Are they even responding? So there's a lot going on. I guess we should start with Syria. The recent news is that the ceasefire is kind of holding up, but I don't expect it to last. I don't expect it to last even till Friday or the weekend. Part of the deal that Erdogan and Putin had come up with 2 weeks ago was that the M4 highway would be opened with a 12-kilometer buffer zone running along it. This would link Aleppo to Latakia, crossing through Sarakib, and the patrol didn't get very far. It went just west of Sarakib, literally less than halfway to Latakia, and it's been blocked by basically jihadi groups, essentially.
Moderate rebels, thank you very much.
Moderate rebels, yes. The Syrian Observatory has said that they're being oppressed. Of course, these people have taken over combat vehicles. They don't hesitate to have their women and children block the roads, but the men men with guns are literally lurking behind buildings, based on some of the video footage that I've seen. So this is untenable. These groups simply don't expect to lose Idlib, or they don't expect to be essentially quadrant off from the most important roads around Idlib city within Idlib province. So I'm willing to bet that there's going to be skirmishes. Eventually, this is going to lead to a firefight. So what happens after that, I don't know. Are we going to have Erdogan opening up, so another several, tens of thousands of flood into Greece or at Greece's border? I'm not sure. Erdogan is beholden, as he was beholden, based on the Sochi Agreement, of course, to eliminate known terrorist groups in Idlib. And that's basically why Russia and specifically Syria, Hezbollah, Iran have targeted those groups, because, of course, he's not, and probably not willing to rein them in. And I can see that he's more conciliatory this time. Turkey acknowledged that there were problems, that the patrol couldn't proceed. So I'm willing to bet that he's open to containing these groups. I think in some ways he knows after his meeting with Stoltenberg that he's not going to get the kind of help that he wants. His only ace in the hole right now is the millions of migrants and refugees that he's been housing. He's already made overtures that they'll be released, for EU ascension, something I already said that he would probably have done anyways, even if Idlib had remained relatively quiet, or I don't know, whatever jihadi group was happy with the state of things. But they weren't, and they were not quiet. In other areas of Syria, particularly in the northeast section, an IED has blown up one of the patrol vehicles. 2 Turkish soldiers, along with 3 Turkish-backed militias, were killed. This follows on the heels of some other killings that took place last week. So, and this event that I'm mentioning now happened, I think, on the weekend or Friday. So, this is an interesting development. My guess is going to be a Kurdish group that's probably not working all that closely. Has planted these roadside bombs, but it's becoming out of whack, and it's untenable. I think Erdogan knows eventually he will have to pull back his forces. There'll have to be some kind of an agreement with Syria, because really the only other option is to prolong this war indefinitely. And of course, the problem is that the longer it goes on, the more migrants and refugees he's going to receive, and he's not willing to receive anymore, I don't think. The EU is not, I think, willing to pay for it. The EU right now is very preoccupied with the coronavirus, and it doesn't look like he has a lot of strategic room right now to maneuver in.
Oh yeah, I absolutely agree, and pretty much sums it all up. And the one time I'll let you do an intro, you pretty much take over my show. But no, that was actually pretty good. Pretty succinct, probably more succinct than I could have put it. I know you did more of the research on Syria this week, but yeah, I don't see how this doesn't end without a proper fight. They've tried peace deal after peace deal, and again, it just breaks down. It fights every time. Now, I'm not saying all-out warfare would be best, but judging on the European response to the border, particularly Greece, Bulgaria, and the subsequent countries that supported them, it may be a bit of an emboldening for Assad's forces, for the Russians, for the other pro-government forces to push in, because it's all bluff on Erdogan's part. He tried to send the migrants over, and they just couldn't get through. And especially now with Europe shutting its borders, which we will get into, they may just outright go in and take care of it, because they physically cannot send the migrants to Europe now. The border is sealed. Turkey is not in the EU. It's not in Europe. So this may be a bright spot in a very dark ocean that is this absolute disaster going on right now. And, I'll say this. I think it's also interesting. Another country that hasn't been afflicted by the coronavirus yet is Syria. Funny how that works.
Yes, that's right.
And one last major piece of news I have for Syria is, look, I know we criticize Trump a lot, but he's been better on some things than he hasn't. He's shown some restraint, but Mike Pompeo came out today with a tweet congratulating the freedom fighters in Syria on the 9th year of their struggle for freedom and democracy, or something along those lines. So don't be fooled. Despite the fact I don't think we're going to get involved in Syria, especially now with all these other crises going on, the administration, at least the Trump administration, is not happy with what is happening in Idlib. There was no reason to put that out aside from saying Idlib is falling, we must do something, or somebody must do something.
Yeah, we have to also accept that Syria as a whole has not been a popular war. If you just look at various Western publications, be it the London Times, the New York Times, the Washington Post, there are many others, including the Guardian. All of them are in favor of bringing attention. CNN had an article today about, here's what we can do for Syria. We can give them intelligence. It's like you already do. They had someone who's a resident there. Please don't send money for food. We need you to do more than that. Of course, you want them to fight for your war naturally, right?
Of
Food's
course.
not enough. right? It's just it's ridiculous. As if Trump's administration, like Obama's administration, hasn't already thought of this. And let's not forget, a few years back, I believe it was just before Trump was sworn in, or just after. I think it was before, where they asked, "How many freedom fighters do we actually have?" It was something like less than 500.
Oh
So
yes,
which one is it?
that was in 2015, back when we started
Yeah,
training the freedom fighters against ISIS and how the Pentagon and CIA backed groups were attacking each other.
yeah. Oh yes, I remember. Good time. So we had jihadis that were supported by the CIA fighting jihadis that were supported by the Pentagon.
Well, no, hold on.
That's
Correction. You had jihadis supported by the CIA and Kurdish anarchists supported by the Pentagon.
Oh, okay,
Even
yeah,
better.
even better. True, true. So, where are the number of freedom fighters has suddenly inflated. They're all freedom fighters in Idlib, and so I don't think help is coming. It's not just an election year. And we'll get into it later, but it's actually a pretty disastrous election year. And the world is preoccupied right now with Corona, Corona, Corona. Um, so I think, yet again, God is on the side of Putin. How does he do it? um, so yes, the situation is really in Russia's benefit. I mean, no, none of us expected the ceasefire would last long, and it's not. It really isn't. Like, these groups are. I mean, I have to hand it to them. I mean, they really are determined to carve out this piece of land for themselves. And really, what they're most afraid of is that they're ideologically set against Assad. They don't like that he's an Alawite. They don't like that he's associated with Shia. They're Sunnis. People have often said that that this is it's not really. I mean, there is a religious element and there is an economic element to this war. I don't think one negates the other. Uh, and I think on this lower, on this lower economic bracket, I think, with as is often the case with nationalism, the people who are most nationalists are really the people who have the most to lose, and they're not the tycoons, they're not powerful politicians, and so on. So that's what I think it comes down to. They're just not willing to lose to Assad. They're not willing to adapt. I think many of them thought that the reign of the Assads, with going all the way back to his father, that era would come to an end. And I suppose there's still many who think it's possible. But that's all I've got from Syria
Here's how the
at the
rebel can
moment.
still win, guys.
That's right. Here's how the rebels can still win.
I wonder who's more delusional, Bernie Bros or supporters of the Syrian Revolution, which I imagine there's a pretty big cross section.
I know. It's just
And
it really is something. Yeah, how are they even like? Like I say, I have to hand it to them. I really, really do. I don't know how they've managed to keep their spirits up like this.
I mean, I suppose a nice CIA or Mossad or Turkish intelligence paycheck here and there helps keep the spirits up. Uh, and of course, whatever plunder. Now, I suppose those days have passed, but yeah, things in Syria are chugging along as usual, even as the entire world is on fire. And we will move over to Syria's neighbor, the nation of Iraq, and there were more skirmishes, of course, where
Hmm.
you had Iranian backed groups, not Iran proper, at least they didn't accuse Iran proper of this, that launched rocket attacks at U.S. bases, and I believe also tried to attack the embassy again. More of the usual. And I believe if we haven't already passed it, we're coming up on the Iraqi government's deadline for American forces to withdraw from the country. And I was surprised by this news that the United
Hmm.
States is closing several bases in Iraq following the rock attacks that killed three and wounded hundreds of others earlier this year.
Yes.
And I was expecting them to ignore the Iraqi orders. Now, I don't know whether this is at the behest of Iraq where they're expecting their wishes, or whether it's just because it's just too untenable that their presence there is too unpopular. They're just going to keep on being attacked and keep on dealing with the challenges. It could be either, but the point being is it looks like we're getting out of several. Now, I don't imagine our presence from the country will be entirely withdrawn, and those troops will probably be moved to somewhere like Kuwait or Qatar or any of our other various bases in the region. I don't imagine they're coming home or going even within this hemisphere or even in Europe. Uh, yeah, I expect most of them to probably be moved to, like I said, Kuwait or Qatar. Not even Turkey
Yeah.
at this
Oh,
point.
they literally need to be close by, you know, uh, because I just can't picture that America is going to leave the region. It can't afford to leave the region. And I mean, it's it's still the world's power.
Yeah, we sort of hitched our wagons to this. That this isn't going to be easy to get out.
Right. I mean, and then to consider the fact that the dollar is actually based on the purchasing and selling of oil itself.
Oh boy, and
It's not.
oil. Oh, we'll get into the oil prices.
Yes, I love oil. Yeah. Blunt loves oil. Yeah, so I have to say that I'm assuming these are the Shia militia groups in Iraq. They have persisted,
Yeah, I
considering the
think it
kind
was
of damage.
specifically the PMU, which is the Popular Mobilization Unit, and then Kaiteb Hezbollah, the Iraqi Hezbollah.
Yeah, I mean, considering the kind of damage they sustained to equipment, let alone life, I'm frankly surprised that they retaliated so quickly. Because the losses are pretty big. So they seem quite determined.
Oh yes, and we discussed this at the end of last year, beginning of this year, that it would just be this tit for tat where they exchange fire, they condemn each other, and it just
Mhm.
continues on. But it seems like there's actually some U.S. withdrawals now. One thing we did not take into consideration when we talked about that is the fact that there would be a global pandemic, which again we'll get into. But
Right.
I think that covers it for Iraq. You want to do oil or stock market first? I suppose they're sort of intertwined, but I figured oil is probably
Uh,
the more natural transition from here.
yeah, yeah. I was
Oil
going to say.
is below $30 a barrel. Gas prices in the United States, at least, have plummeted. Uh, they've gone down like 50 cents, at least. I'm not going to give away exact prices here. Uh, that, of course, is something we touched on last week with Russia and Saudi Arabia and OPEC and their deal to sort of uh, pull this switch while the U.S. economy was in a more fragile state, and it just keeps on going down and down. Now, globally, for the global economy, especially with how intertwined oil is to it, this is not a good sign. It's you want that healthy area, I would say, where it stays in the upper 30s to 40s. Anything above or below that is a sign that the global economy is not doing well. Which, again, as much as I detest the system, I don't think crashing the ground and burning it, despite there may be conflicting views between us on that. I don't think crashing it to the ground and burning is the best way to take care of this, and that there will be consequences even for us peons. But it's been wild to watch. Not look, it is somewhat related to the virus, but it's also largely independent of it. And it's that thing where you can have all these individual events that are happening. You can take any of these individual events that are happening right now, but it's them put together that's created such an impact not only in the United States but the global economy, and that in large part also has to do with oil prices and American domestic energy production, and it's getting wild out there.
Right, and also, it should be mentioned that the way some of the media, and quite expectedly, CNN is already writing articles about what Mastermind Putler is doing. He's going to ruin America's shale production, but in another article by another publication, I don't know if it was Foreign Affairs, they did mention, first of all, that fracking shale gas and oil, that this is costly. Like, that there's an enormous amount of debt on Wall Street itself to keep fracking going. And anytime oil dips below $60, $50 US, it's at a loss. And, it's expected something like 50, even upwards of 50% of these small to medium-sized companies could probably fold. That said, I don't believe that, Putin is doing this, to ruin, the American economy. The fact is the OPEC Plus agreement was there to stabilize basically oil prices and oil production, and especially up to 2014, when right after Ukraine, there was a dip in gas prices, and of course sanctions and so on. That was the nature of the agreement, and of course, Saudi Arabia offered to, stop production, something which Russia can't do and isn't part of the agreement. So naturally, Russia stuck to the agreement and they kept production going. To which Saudi Arabia decided, well, okay, then what I'll do is I'll sell it really more and increase production. That lets you know that there's two parties here making decisions within Saudi Arabia. And I'm willing to bet one of them isn't Saudi Arabia.
Now, what could you mean by
or
that?
It could be two factions. So you can see how absolutely nonsensical this is, right? Like, I thought that this was like, how do you, like, they literally went in the opposite direction. Keep prices as they are, but cut down production. No, double, triple the amount and dramatically reduce the cost of the oil. Like, that's nonsensical, right? Obviously, in my opinion, Saudi Arabia doesn't and can't really do that much on their own, without American, an American contribution, or even an American order. So,
Just think
yeah,
about.
that's
I mean, oil and gas
that's
prices
my
have just been an absolute roller coaster over the course of just the past year. Like, you had the national average peaking at almost $3 a gallon in the United States, and then dropping down to like $2 a gallon, all between March of 2019 and right now March 2020. It's I mean, of course, that's between the politics of the Middle East, that's between the production, as we were just talking about, and again, the one thing nobody could have predicted, which is the global pandemic and further economic effects. What we have right here is the Dow closed with 2,999 points, which is down 13%. Now, this is the worst drop point in history, and it's also the worst second percentage drop in history since 1896. Now, to compare that globally,
yeah.
Brazil was 14, Canada 9.8, Turkey 8.1, India 8, Spain 7.9, Italy 6.1, France 5.7, Germany 5.2, Saudi Arabia 5.2, the UK 4%, and the Netherlands 3.7%. So, and just in as of 5, no, that's actually from this morning, But still, stock markets in France, Italy, and Spain are all down by over 10% as of yesterday. So the markets just keep on tumbling and tumbling. Now, you saw, I'm pretty sure most of you saw on Friday, Trump uh, boasted, oh, the market's up this weekend because he gave his emergency address right before the markets closed and pumped more money into them to secure a little bit of confidence. But by the time Monday morning, that all came tumbling back down, and it keeps on going down second by second. You can look at the live counters. During Trump's address today, they had one that just tracked it and just kept on going down and down and down. I mean, this is you see the
Yeah,
comparisons to 1896 to 1929 to 1987, 2008 especially. Uh, the entire again things are being wrecked by this simple thing, and of course that's bringing all these other problems to the surface. But it just goes to show the fragility of this neoliberal system. We and we'll get into this as well. We talk about the Russian perspective of their they don't have this focus on eternal exponential growth and have more of a mind of stability. Now, not that the economics aren't heading into trouble, but it seems like they're faring better, at least so far. But the point being is the West, particularly the Anglospheres, particularly the United States, obsession with growth. I mean, look, the phrase "easy come, easy go" exists for a reason. Look at, Trump boasted and bragged on this and pretty much campaigned on this. The stock market has never been higher. Look at these economic figures. And just as easily as they rose up because Trump changed a few regulations and put confidence in the market because he's the rich billionaire, it all came down just as quickly.
yeah. It's extraordinary where it's happening. I mean, there are people right now, literally in the thousands globally, that are losing their jobs. These are people who work for the airlines. These are people who work for bars and restaurants. There's many, many others. People simply cannot afford to pay them. Uh, we don't really even know how long this kind of semi-imposed quarantine or social distancing or whatever you want to call it is going to go on. Um, but you can see how, like, a few days or a few weeks, um, you can see what kind of difference it's made. Um, Not good. And it does. I do have a kind of an interesting comparison when we had the swine flu back in 2009. 13,000 Americans died, it's estimated, and about 300,000 were infected. It did get coverage, but it didn't get the kind of coverage that we're seeing now. Not even remotely close. And you could argue that in some ways that protected the market. Of course, thousands of people had to literally die for it, perhaps. We won't know. It is spreading, and it's taking a toll, as we say, on the people and on the economy. France, for instance, has closed its schools, its universities, its restaurants, its cafes. It's all locked down, and similarly, it's that also has been introduced in Spain. I think we're going to see a lot more countries doing this now.
Yeah, I don't see how they can't at this point. You have several individual states within the U.S. shutting down. Several have barred sit-down restaurants, but are still doing carry-out and delivery. Now, I doubt that'll last long. Many have shut down public schools, K through 12, in which most higher education institutions and daycares, nurseries, preschools have also followed suit in that. You have entire sectors of the economy shutting down, and uh, what the big push, at least in the United States, is right now is some sort of emergency UBI to sustain payments at during this time. You've seen similar things in Italy where they waive off mortgage payments or other utility payments, and uh, I don't see how we can't uh, we can't not do this. I don't see any other option. It's either this or collapse. And yes, it's going to put a strain on our economy. The economy is already strained as it is, but the option is pile more on top of the multi-trillion-dollar debt, which at this point it doesn't really seem like it even matters. I mean, because look, we all know that the modern economy is largely fantasy, so you might as well pile it on because if you don't now, it's going to get a lot worse. And again, like we're seeing how fragile this entire global system is. It's not
Yeah.
just the United States, not just Europe. I mean, look, China has had their struggles with it, and I don't know how much you in the audience believe in the official numbers. I of course think they're off, but it seems like you also look at even South Korea. They've had a degree of recovery in Asia with the initial outbreak. Now, I'm not saying it's completely recovered. I'm not saying we have all the information about this, but point being is, look, it did quite the number on the Chinese system, which again is a bureaucratic nightmare. If I'm being honest about my opinion with it, and
Hmm.
that still managed to fare better than Western liberal democracies. And just
Right.
now, 6 weeks into when this started to make international media, when people started to say this may be a threat, this is something we want to keep our eyes on, late January, early February, just now have we reached the point where we're taking the actions we should have been taking 2, 3 weeks ago. Now, the Russians, I'll start out with them because credit where credit is due, had the right idea. They were one of the first countries to shut the land border and sort of temporarily suspend trade and travel with China, at least to a degree, which they incrementally increased to the point where the Russian state, the Russian Federation, is not letting in any foreigners until at least May.
Right. And they accomplished this by January 29th. So they got on it really fast. Uh, it's still less than 50 cases, no deaths. They have begun shutting down like sporting events. They had their last sporting event at a soccer match at the Zenit Stadium in St. Petersburg, and they actually had like this banner that basically said something like, "We're infected with love of the Zenit soccer team," something to that effect. Anyways, they just literally never stopped trolling. Um, but yeah, so they're, like Singapore, they seem to be doing fine. No deaths. It's very stringent, but also no scenes of people being dragged out and so on. There is a kind of preparation that I think they want stability, and this is, I don't mean to harp back on the subject that we were talking about earlier, but Russia's not interested in the West like falling apart. They want a certain amount of stability that they can, sell the oil, preferably for a higher price. Number two, one of the reasons why they're able to sustain a fight with Saudi Arabia is because they have a much bigger cushion that they have saved up. So they're willing to fight with, this oil war, as it were, with Saudi Arabia. And yes, one of those consequences will be America, but it's ultimately America, I think, that has asked Saudi Arabia to do this. So America has to brace itself for it. And so yeah, it's a question of the stability. They feel they have a different breaking point, and they acted quickly, probably because it's not the worst healthcare in the world, but I think they estimated that what kind of a potential burden this could be on Russia if they didn't act quickly. I think they were very honest with themselves about what kind of how prepared they were, what kind of facilities they had. Like they worked quite closely with China. And I think they extrapolated very quickly and acted quickly, so that they didn't have the kind of catastrophe that's happening in some countries like Italy.
Yeah, and you also make a good point in terms of China and release of information. I imagine that the Chinese government was probably much more open with the truth of the matter with Russia and other, I guess, say, allied countries than they were with the West or even the Chinese public. So I wouldn't be surprised if the Chinese government told the Russians, you need to shut it down. You need to shut it down right now.
Yeah.
Even though
Yeah.
I don't necessarily 100% believe that, because the United States, I figured, such a big trading partner, even though, again, that goes both ways to the point where do they really want to shut down things in the United States and lead to a more exasperated crisis, to the point where it was a difficult tightrope to balance. And I'm not even saying China's actions were right or wrong. I'm looking at this purely from the point of view of the Chinese ruling class, of Xi Jinping, of the other leaders of China, where they look at it, they have probably one of the closest countries, one of the most important countries for their global ambitions, Russia, which is mainly a military armament and energy hub for them. I wouldn't be surprised, again, if they tipped them off about that, even though I would say the case against that, just to put both sides out there, I don't think the Russians would have been stingy with this information to the West. Look, things are bad, but I don't think they're that bad.
Only Putin has seen the videotapes of Wuhan residents still alive, infected with corona, being thrown into incinerators.
Yes, that is true.
I literally had a friend of mine tell me this without irony, that was happening. I'm going, can you calm down, please? like, I'm not saying they're honest, but like I have strong doubt about this. So they have a doctor who's like posting all this stuff, and it's all over social media. The Chinese government has lost face again, and but also, did you know that they're building hospitals and incinerating people while still alive? It's just so like they don't even examine what they're saying.
Look, I honestly don't have a problem believing, and I'm not sure. I haven't done enough looking into this. That, yeah, it wouldn't surprise me if they burnt the dead bodies, but alive patients and people suffering from the virus. Again, that seems like a bit of a stretch, even for a country that functions like China. But seriously, yes, Putin is the only one who has seen those tapes. Now, horrifying, absolutely. But again, there's a theme to this particular episode and to this show as a whole. The fact that it shows the failures, despite the issues with the Russian system, despite the issues with all these other non-Western systems. It shows the failure of liberal democracy, that the United States, that these first world countries could not muster the same response and as quickly as the Russians did. And Russia may come out on top of this, and look, it's a very Russian way to do it, just by attrition. It seems like a common theme throughout their history. Now, I'm not making any prediction either way. I think this thing is much too volatile to make any of those kind of predictions. But moving on to the reactions of other nations, Canada just today shut down international travel, and it is a bit interesting watching Trudeau be more proactive about. Again, not to backtrack too much, but Hungary was another one. Poland was another one. Look, I wouldn't say they're illiberal, but these less than liberal systems were still able to muster a better response than the first world Western democracies. But Canada just shut it down today before the United States officially did. Now, of course, you'll find some source saying, oh, Trump has shut down all travel. He's making America great again. He's going to save our lives. And in some cases, let's say, Trump has done nothing to fight this one. Again, the truth is somewhere in the gray area, which we'll get into. But the Canadians have shut it down. The European Union has shut it down. Things they should have been doing 2, 3, 4 weeks ago. And look, better late than never, but they've created an entire new mess that they wouldn't have had to deal with if they would have just been proactive and not been the, frankly, victim of their ideology. Now, not to go on too much of a tangent, but people talk about how the communist states were victims of their ideology, which I would admit in part is true, but we're seeing just the same in the case of Western democracy.
Yeah, and to that, I just want to read something that Mike Enoch wrote on Twitter. I'm not on Twitter. I just saw somebody post this, but I thought it was relevant. I'll go as quickly as I can through this. The reality of liberalism creates an ironic inversion of typical conspiracy narratives. In classic conspiracy tales, the government induces a false crisis to impose emergency martial law and an authoritarian crackdown on the people. The reality is the opposite under liberalism. Under liberalism, the government refuses to acknowledge the crisis, tells the people to keep shopping and not limit their freedom in any way, and can't think of solutions outside the debt finance economic model, while the people cry out for an authoritarian response. I thought that was very, very well said. That's not the whole thread, but I thought in that he kind of sums up what. Now, I don't, I know this, I have friends who, believe that the vaccines that are coming out are going to have chips that track you down and so on. And I understand that. I understand that fear. I don't want to diminish it. I know, I mean, people have literally been saying this for 25 years. The truth is that they have other methods of monitoring what you're doing and where you are, anyways. And
You mean like
it's
those mini computers we all carry around daily?
exactly right. So I thought that was interesting. I think that kind of sums up what we're trying to say, that people want. And you don't hear the xenophobia talk. Remember the accusations at the end of February, first week of March? Oh, you're just a xenophobe. Oh, this everyone can, and it was just tiresome. And like, so were the Chinese xenophobic with the people in Wuhan? Like, these are just measures for containment.
Yes, the Chinese government is very bigoted against Cantonese, I'll have you know.
Yes. Yeah, so you can see everything from the interdependency of everything from pharmaceuticals to laptops to the oil trade, cars, travel, airlines. It just goes on and on.
It does, and it is interesting from both the point of views on China, where they're either this grave threat or they're this unruly partner we must put back in line, this unruly trading partner. The fact that it really showed that, look, I know on this show we've sort of, at least I have waffed on China, whether they are this great threat or whether they're just more of a nuisance or whether it's even relevant at all. But it's shown that, look, regardless of whether that would have been China or Russia or somewhere in Europe, outsourcing all of your vital industry to one place or a few places, which, again, in this case, mostly East Asia, whether that be Vietnam, China, Indonesia, etc., has its pitfalls. When crisis breaks out, like it did in China, when it led to a complete national shutdown, when you're manufacturing your pharmaceuticals there, I'm not even talking about like your consumer goods, which again I think should be domestically manufactured, but I'm not even talking about like these things that would make life harder not to have, but you can ultimately survive without. Life-saving medications, just to
You're right.
save a few bucks for people like the Sacklers. People like the Sacklers who have flooded this country with opiates, who are directly responsible for the drug crisis we have now. We're busy saving them a few bucks by putting our entire national security and national sovereignty at stake. Let that sink in.
Mm-hmm.
Oh boy! But other responses, I suppose we should break down what Trump said. Now, Trump has given a series of several press conferences and speeches about this. On last Wednesday night, he gave a speech, the primetime one, where he looked very disheveled and sweaty and looked like he probably hadn't slept in 3 days, which I would believe in a time like this, where he came out saying we're suspending travel to Europe starting Friday at midnight. Came out and said, "Oh, look at how we suspend travel to China," which again isn't entirely true, and that was largely criticized even by people more on the right, people who support him, saying it didn't go far enough. And then on Friday, he gives about an hour-long press conference, laying out his further measures, more stuff about the European travel ban. And today he gave a press conference going into detail about his administration's response and the domestic response. People are expecting a national shutdown on non-essential goods and services, like is being done in Italy, like is being done in many other places. Now we didn't get that. I wouldn't be surprised if that's in the woodwork. There's talks of interstate travel shutdown, uh, which again I wouldn't be surprised, nor would I oppose at this point. I think frankly we should have done it sooner, but I can repeat myself all day long on that point. And it mostly surprisingly, I wouldn't say surprisingly enough, but it was mostly people around Trump speaking from him, whether that be Pence, who's technically in charge of the task force, whether that be the doctors or the other officials in charge of managing this crisis. It was mostly them speaking and taking questions. But what killed me was, look, this is an unprecedented situation, at least the way we're reacting to it and with how intertwined the global economy is. And I would say, look, I've been critical of Trump's response we have, especially with his main concern being the economy. But it hasn't been the worst thing in the world. It could have been worse. I don't agree with people who say Hillary would have managed this better or whoever would have managed this better. Frankly, I think it's been suitable. I would like to see better. I'd like to see much better, but I know that isn't in the cards. But he goes on. Trump gets asked how would he rate his administration response out of 1 out of 10. Without hesitation, he says 10. Which again, that goes to show that goes to show what we're dealing with here. Of course he would give himself the highest rating possible, but
I'm surprised he didn't say 11.
I'm surprised he didn't do like 10 at least or something like that.
Yeah. Yeah, it's really not showing him in the best light. And then there's another controversy around Trump, and that is that he was putting pressure on Germany to have exclusive rights to a vaccine that Germany is close to creating. This is, I should mention also that the first volunteer for a vaccine in the U.S., a woman, I forget her name, has taken the vaccine. So just to put into perspective about, who's creating the vaccine and how fast. Nonetheless, so he's been putting pressure on Germany to have the rights to the vaccine, that America should have exclusive rights to this vaccine. It's, this is just not the right time. He's like, I think on a tactical level, he's doing better, but he's had to be pushed to do better. I think his staff has let him know that he has to take this much more seriously. And so his tune has changed. That doesn't particularly bode well for him. It's not a good look. And this suggestion that America only has it should only have the exclusive right to to the cure for COVID-19 is, that's just preposterous.
Well, I think this is honestly part of Trump's greater global strategy that countries that don't support Israel, don't move their embassy to Jerusalem, and don't have decriminalized homosexuality will not get any of the vaccine.
Yes, and you know what country has not had any COVID-19 deaths, as far as I know?
What's that?
India.
Huh.
Uh-huh. And he was recently there. And, to that, I think if that should arise in India, I think they would get it. Because today is the first gay romance was released in India.
Oh, so I'm glad Trump's foreign policy is really sending ripples.
It's working
throughout not only our culture but foreign cultures as well. Now,
yeah, and only base gays will appreciate this.
Of course. Now, getting back on topic,
Yeah.
France has had a decent response. Seems like Doomer Macron, he was only having a bad day, only blackpilling for a day. where he banned public and private gatherings over 5 people, which again is a bit, I would say, of an overstretch, but better safe than sorry in that case. So it looks like
Mhm.
France and Europe as a whole has it together. Germany's response has been a bit lackluster, but ultimately, I would say what takes the cake for the worst response in the world is the United Kingdom, by far.
Yes.
I mean, it's gotten to the point where Trump added the United Kingdom and Ireland to his travel restrictions when it came to Europe. Their idea, the one that gets kicked around, especially by British conservatives, is well, we just need to let the population get infected and build up a herd immunity to it. A herd immunity to a virus you can be reinfected with. Because there's people in Wuhan, China, who have gotten it, recovered, and gotten it again. A herd immunity
Wow.
to a virus that they're treating with HIV, that they were treating with HIV and cancer drugs initially in China, when everything else failed. But yes, we just need to build a herd immunity to this. Now, this had also been proposed in Sweden as well. It seems like a common theme among the sort of countries. So, as much as we criticize Trump, as much as we criticize the American response or any of the
Hmm.
other various responses, nobody can do worse than what the United Kingdom is doing right now.
Agreed. And I'm glad you brought that up because we do have to keep perspective about this. I mean, this show is it's of course you're American, I'm Canadian, America Junior. So naturally we're going to direct our attention there a lot, but it is important to remember how other countries have not dealt with this very successfully. Like Italy has a universal healthcare system, and it's not going very well. I think they only have one respiratory company building them, and they are taxed right now, trying to make as many as possible. And as I said earlier, the death toll now is over 2,000. Saturday saw something like 124 deaths in one day. Um, of course, Germany, as far as I know, had 8 deaths as of Friday, but they have considered what are considered the best respiratory machines, and also several companies who make them, and so they're coping with it a lot better.
Yeah, and again, that goes back to a lot of the problems we were at least discussing off air with the dysfunction of the Italian state that's never really been an efficient organism. Not even fascism could make the trains run on time. Keep that in mind. But I'm not saying that the Italian government, the Italian bureaucracy is completely blameless for all this because they're not, and they're not for a lot of the crises Italy faces as a admittedly close thing a Western country, Western first world country can be to a dysfunctional state. Again, a lot of that burden lies internally, but I do think the EU deserves some blame for this when you're supposed to be this international cooperation organization, this cooperation of European nations, this European fraternity, as it were, and they haven't lifted a finger to send any aid, not even financial, not doctors, not any medical aid, to Italy. Now, look,
Hmm.
China, to their
Hmm.
credit, has. The Russians haven't, which kind of surprised me. I figured they would jump all over that opportunity, even though the way I see it is they're probably shoring up things at home before they really start sending out their humanitarian aid missions. But I don't know. It seems like a perfect opportunity for them to capitalize. They don't have any cases. Look, look, we may see that in a couple weeks, but that's all speculation. But look, beyond the blame that can be laid at the feet of the Italian government and the Italian system as a whole, just as much belongs to the European Union that pledges to help these countries in times of crisis.
You're right.
And especially not even from like a moral obligation or a contractual treaty obligation. If they don't step in, if Germany, if France, if these larger European countries don't step in, larger at least in terms of economy and functionality, that is, don't step in, they could be looking at a situation way worse than Greece when it comes economically. Look at how many loans this country's taken. Look how much debt it's in. Do they really want to go through that again? Are we just repeating
Mhm.
2015 with a migrant crisis, with another economic, what could be said, an economic collapse in Southern Europe? And look, even Spain has fared better than Italy has at this point. And yeah, that's all I have to say about European front. But despite that, despite the Italian blunders, at least they're trying to do something. At least they're doing something, and not just ignoring the crisis, hoping it'll go away and people build up herd immunity like they are in the UK. That's all I can say about that situation in particular.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah, I wonder, like, what are they really prepared for this fallout? This is, I guess, it's tough love.
and nothing. I would expect nothing more from the Anglo, and yeah, I'm glad they definitely aren't shutting down travel to their country or anything. That would just be a mistake. That might affect the economy. Of course, that's the altar we will all be sacrificed on. But again, that covers pretty much everything I wanted to say. But I made this point again. And I just want to hammer it back just one more time before getting out of here. In my opinion, look, it may be because of my age, my perspective. This is bigger than 9/11. There's no way this isn't. It's look, 9/11 terrible in terms of loss of human life, even though we've pretty much exceeded the deaths there. But you can't really compare terrorism to a disease when it comes to cause death. But point being is societal, economic, and cultural and political impact. I would say when this is all said and done is going to be more impactful than what that was. Because you think about it, I was actually having this conversation today. My dad and my brother were taking a flight 2 months after 9/11. Now, a lot of people were apprehensive to travel, but people weren't quarantined to their homes. Trade wasn't shut down. Travel wasn't shut down. Now it was for a little bit, but it wasn't shut down to the extent it is now. Uh, the entire global economy was not turned on its head. We did not enter into a recession because look, they can tell you how strong the economy is. They can throw all these paper tiger numbers at you, but we are in a recession. It's just the fact that they have not admitted it yet. And it's called into question the entire post-war liberal order. And again, you can point to the failures of China. You can point to the failures of these other liberal systems to contain this. But for a system that purports to be this universal, globalist, end of history system, the fact that it cannot sustain what is admittedly a lot of pressure, but it can't sustain a crisis like this, then in my opinion, it does not deserve to exist.
Yeah. Yeah, I think there's going to be a lot of rethinking. You know, there's lots of things, of course, that 9/11 ushered in: the way we fly, the way we're monitored, the way background checks are done, and so on. And the impact of almost what were fruitless wars against it, and definitely one very spurious war in Iraq. But it did change, the way we conceived of our society. There's life before and after, and I tend to agree with you that this is something that will be another sort of change in consciousness. And I don't mean that in some kind of trite, new agey kind of way, but I think it does mark this milestone, this different way that we're going to think about these things going forward, and not least of which will be how interconnected, how interdependent are we going to make the economy? Like, how much are we going to depend on pharmaceuticals from China? China's had several of these epidemics. How long are we going to do business this way, right? Like, so a lot of the issues that I think the dissident right has been concerned about, like you've mentioned through the show, they are being underscored here, and publications like in the Telegram, the Guardian, BBC, they are addressing this. They're very well aware that this is, in their words, it's fodder for their cause. But they can be cynical all they want about it. These are valid points. And I suppose, one of the things that we should keep in mind about empires is that all empires basically die in the process of just having achieved or in the process of achieving the universal state. And I think that's what the last 20 years have been about. You could argue even from the last 30 years have been about, is creating this American universal global state. And this is, I think, definitely calling it. It's at least showing the limits of that, and how people will, from this point on, how they will, interact, the way they'll do business, the way they'll conceive their countries and their civilizations.
Oh, absolutely. And I say this, I don't like to, quote unquote, politicize these things. I don't like to use these kind of situations to brag, but I do want to say, as a former small government conservative, free trader, that the less regulation on the market, the better type, this is a vindication of an authoritarian, paternalistic state. And look, people who want to dispute that in this particular crisis will point to China, which I admittedly said, look, they are an authoritarian, paternalistic state, but it also does share a lot of the same bureaucratic mazes that are shared by Western liberal democracies, which is a little bit of an irony there. But again, the response by countries like Hungary, Poland, Russia, Eastern Europe in general, it's a vindication of, again, I would say illiberal democracy, as Orban put it. Uh, Look, the Chinese system, I wouldn't say failed, but it had a massive blunder. Western liberal democracies, again, I wouldn't say failed, but also had a massive blunder, especially concerning the image they painted of themselves, the invincible end of history vision. Look, China, they've propped themselves up, they've created quite an image for themselves in the eyes of the public and the international community, but they never claimed to be the end of history. They never claimed to be, this is what all countries strive to be. They were just out to make money,
Mhm.
which frankly I can kind of respect, but it's a vindication of all
Yeah.
the things, as you said, that the distant right, that a lot of people opposed to the mainstream from a more right wing perspective have been saying since 2015 and even earlier.
Hmm. Yeah.
And that's compared to the fact that uh, liberals spent all of February calling it hoax. Conservatives spent the last 3 weeks calling it a hoax. The only people who ever took this serious were a bunch of idiots with anonymous accounts online. I didn't discuss it much, so I'm not going to credit myself. But we've talked about it on the show. It's been people who do YouTube live streams and have Twitter accounts and make Twitter threads who called this from the beginning. Look, the closest thing to a mainstream figure that got this, which no surprise, was Tucker Carlson, and even he was a little slow on the uptake on it.
He was, but I mean,
At least he addressed
my
it
theory, my
seriously.
theory is he's been watching the Weekly Sweat, so he probably subs to like Beardson and to Sean Hubers. So, I mean, good on him.
But on a serious note,
And
it's actually funny. You go through Ann Coulter's Twitter follower. She follows a bunch of like those sort of accounts.
yeah, I know, I love that. Private, private and public, and Coulter. I can kind of guess what private and Coulter is like.
Oh, I can only imagine. But I'm just saying, as much we joke, but these people who are quote unquote in the mainstream that speak these truths have to have a bit of a finger on the pulse on what a bunch of people under pseudonyms on our side of the internet are doing.
Yeah, yeah, and the Irony Bros were right again. I know it's not just them. I realize.
Yeah,
Okay,
yeah,
I'll
yeah.
stop.
I know it's good content though.
It is good content.
I think we're rolling with something, but yeah, it's just a bunch of people who, look, we all lead, I would say, relatively regular lives. You know, none of us are working. And again, despite all the accusations, despite all the jokes, I don't think any of us are federal agents or have access to like the CIA vaults or anything. But again, just
Hmm.
a bunch of normal, average people monitoring the situation. Monitoring the situation. Notice the phrasing there. Who called this long before the media, the political class, our own government, foreign governments. And again, like I said, I'm not trying to gloat, especially considering the fact how much we avoided talking about it up until recently. But it's wild to see just this complete, I would say, implosion of the system. And I would say at this point, whatever shred of credibility they had, if especially in the United States, this gets to even just Italy levels, whatever credibility that neoliberal system had completely dissipated.
Yeah, yeah. There's going to have to be an entire rethink. Um, I would watch for some people suggesting that well, here's how neoliberalism can be saved. We're just going to come up with better vaccines, and well, that's but the problem is these things mutate, and some vaccines are no longer viable after a certain
Yeah, I mean,
period of time,
like the
especially
reason there's
after.
flu vaccines every year.
Right, and also like there's not like there's a whole family of coronaviruses, right? This is just a new strain, and it's the first time it has been known in animals. It's just this is the first time we've seen it in human beings, and yeah, so we so there is it can't be just better vaccines and more expensive healthcare in order to keep this neoliberal system going. There has to be an entire rethink about it.
Yeah,
And if
it
you
might be that you have to, restrict some travel, restrict some, quote unquote, freedoms in order to contain these sort of things.
right, and if the way the EU has finally been handling like the another migrant crisis, then perhaps there is hope.
Now, I thought, um, it's been a common theme on the show that, look, the American empire, I wouldn't say it's collapsing by any means. Now, ask me in a few weeks, we'll see how things turn out, but it has been on shaky ground ever since, I would say, 2013, 2014. Rise of Russia and Syria and Crimea and everything. But I thought the kind of event that would set the total break of confidence would be something like a war in Syria and or Iran, or a major foreign policy blunder. But again, I think with a lot of people, this thing comes out of nowhere 6 weeks ago, starts spreading like wildfire, and completely turns the system on its head. And
Mhm.
again, I don't want to like sound like I'm bragging or anything, but just to state like the way I've seen it for the past 2 years is it was just that one major crisis to completely delegitimize the system. And look, I didn't have my bets on global pandemic, but here we are. And knowing the United States, I could see right after this clears up, it's like it looks like it's time for war with Iran. And again, if they are dumb enough to, or I would say more appropriately, hubristic enough to go for that double whammy, that that's
Oh yeah.
that's game over for the system. And knowing the elites, they would be high enough on their own power to try something like that.
Yeah, I mean, especially if they think they're going to take a loss, and we do have to be careful about that, about um, the possibility of them feeling that the loss has to be offset.
Yeah, and again, not to drag this on too much, but what if Russia does start offering medical relief to these afflicted countries? What if they come out next week and send Italy respirators, or send doctors there, or to any other afflicted country? What if they offer hell at this point to the United States? And I mean, you already see China, despite the fact they've suffered with their own crisis, sending aid abroad. You don't think that the American elites are going to look at that, even with this crisis going on, thinking, "Oh damn, this is a major blow to our quote unquote global leadership"?
Right, right. Well, I mean, I read an article today in a Canadian publication about, we simply don't have the leaders that we need. What we do have is Trump, Putin, and Xi Jinping. It's like, oh, just stop. Like, you know, I, we've had leaders that were, more to their liking. We've already looked at other epidemics that have, you know, killed a lot of people, and they seem perfectly fine by that. But, the crux of the matter is this: they don't want Trump reelected, obviously. They don't have ammunition against him right now. I mean, yes, arguably they do, right? I don't want to dwell on that too much, but they've exhausted the whole impeachment process, the whole Russia meddling thing, on and on. Like, it didn't take. So what they have now as an option to get him out is to create. And again, I'm not being trite. I take coronavirus seriously. I know we didn't. The numbers were much lower. China seemed already it was recovering, and then what happened in Italy, I think, it really took me for a surprise, as I'm sure it took you. And then we're hearing reports this week that 60% of all new coronavirus patients in France are under 60, which is shocking. So a mutation may already be happening. In any case, so what I'm saying is they could have underreported it, or reported to the level that they did with the swine flu, but that would improve Trump's chances of reelection. So what they've had to do is, report it, maybe over-report it, and become really fixated on it in order and of course we know how lots of these articles are slanted against Trump. I mean, they'll never be happy with what he does, and I'm not a Blumph supporter, okay? Like, I was, but I'm not. But I'm not really in support of anybody. Anyhow, so they're playing this kind of dangerous game, and the elites that want him out are willing, to sink to the bottom to do it, and they might take a hit in order to accomplish this. If, for instance, we have the Olympic Games happen in Japan, this is several months down the road. Trump's sort of prediction that by August, September, this thing could be, nipped in the bud. He's going to come out looking really good. And I think they could get very desperate at that point. So that's kind of like what I see happening here. Those elites that have been set against them from the start have to report it, report it as a certain way, and are overdoing it. And they're literally, it's part of the reason why, like, maybe there are that many shutdowns. Maybe it's just a catch. It's a catch-22. I guess is what I'm saying. And there could be a hit, and they may not be very happy about that. So what they do afterwards, I don't know. Will they try to maintain the empire? Does that mean a war the year after? I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know either. That's looking too far beyond, but it's, again, all I can say is this episode is just wild. Like all the things that happened within this week in particular, but not only that, the past 6 weeks, the past 2, 3 months since the beginning of this year. This again, I joke about this all the time, but I said, oh, the 2020s they're going to be really pivotal, and I had no idea what I was in store for when when I started doing this. You told me 2 years ago when we were talking about just basic
Mm.
things about reports on, oh, here's what happened in Syria. Here's some new trade deal with China. Here's some trade negotiations. Oh, a North Korea summit. If you went back 2 years ago and told me that this would be what we're talking about today, I'd be like, nah, you're exaggerating. It can't be that bad.
Yeah.
And
Yeah. I'm just as surprised as you.
again, I've spent the past 2 years following this week by week, missing a couple here and there, but and this has thrown me through a loop. And look, I'm kind of kicking myself for not taking this too serious. Now, I'm just glad to say that we never said, "Oh, this is completely nothing." No, we opened the door to that possibility, but we never definitively said this is nothing. And that's becoming more and more of a frustrating take amongst blue checkmark conservatives who just parrot Trump's talking points. But now that Trump has got more serious, that'll probably change. But I don't. I think we should probably wind too close before we just repeat ourselves again and again because that's the kind of content
Mhm.
that this is. But this has been the War Report, episode 100, and yeah, that's really thrown us through a loop to the point where Syria and Iraq, all the things that happened there, have been put on the back burner compared to everything
Yeah.
else happening. That's how insane things have gotten. Who
Mhm.
knows what next week will hold? And again, one of us is under quarantine. One of us has had our government shut things down. Now, if we can get puzzle piece number 2 in place, you will get daily episodes, and it will be amazing. And unless you have anything else, I'm
No, that's it. I just want to say thank you for all the subscribers and thank you for tuning into our show, guys. And yeah, 100th episode. This is great.
Yeah, it's been a wild ride, and let's see what the next 100 week holds in store for us. We could be doing the show from a bunker, you know, in which case I would welcome that. But thank you everyone for tuning in, and goodbye.
Goodbye.